In this video, I'm going to continue the review of the new D&D Unearthed Arcana test document called Expert Classes, and we're going to dive into the rules glossary. If you want to see all the rest of the videos where I review the content in here and give my opinion on it, you can check out a link to a playlist in the description down below. And if you want to continue to follow along with what we do here on the channel, you can subscribe to the channel while you're down there, and also consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Eventyr and supporting what we do here. Now, with all that out of the way, we're going to jump into the rules glossary. And the way we're going to do this is that I'll have the rules glossary here, and if there's a rule that we need to compare, I'll try and find it in the basic rules so we can see how it was changed. I'll be jumping quickly over the rules that weren't changed from in this playtest, from the last playtest, and also rules, of course, that aren't significantly changed from what is already in the basic rules. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive into it. And the first thing we have here is the ability check. And what we will notice here is that it's quite similar to the last playtest document, except that it no longer auto-succeeds on a 20, so that you can no longer crit on ability checks. Personally, I didn't mind that they made that change. I think it's fine to automatically succeed on a 20. It's how we played at my table anyway. Am I sad that it's gone? No, it's not a huge issue for me, but personally, I didn't mind it at all. There's also some clarification on when to call for checks, and that's always good, but aside from that, I don't see anything particularly interesting in the ability check in this document. Then we have armor training, and armor training is what we used to call armor proficiency, and I kind of like that because proficiency indicates, in D&D 5e at least, that you are applying your proficiency bonus to something, and you aren't. With armor proficiencies as they were, you just either you have it or you don't get better at wearing armor as you level up, so calling it armor training makes it a lot more intuitive that this is not a proficiency like a skill proficiency or tool proficiency. This is just the ability to wear armor. Otherwise, there's no big changes for armor training, but I like that they've named it differently. Then we have tools, which have just been set to a flat 15 gold pieces per tool. So nothing major, just some uniformity on pricing. Does that necessarily make the most sense? No, but it's also fine that some tools are wildly more expensive than other tools. Again, not a huge change that is going to really impact the game a whole lot, I'd say. Attack roll, I don't see any major changes here, but I can just quickly... Okay, yeah, you could draw a weapon as part of the same action you use to attack. So now you can equip one weapon before or after any attack you make. So that indicates multiple stowing equipping weapons, which also means that the dual wielder feat they have given us in this playtest has a redundant quick draw because you would just be able to do that normally. So yeah, and I think that's fine. I think it's how it should be. So I don't mind that they are doing it. They should just remove it from the feat. Moving between attacks, that's the same, I think. And then we have attack roll. I don't see anything major here, except of course that critical rolls are rolled back to standard, which of course means that monster crits are back, sneak attack crits are back, and all that good stuff. I think they were kind of quick in rolling this back. I didn't necessarily like that monsters couldn't crit. I was nervous that the rogue, paladin, stuff like that was going to get gimped, especially the rogue. The paladin isn't the weakest class, so we could probably take it, but the rogue didn't need any more nerfs, I think. So I prefer the old rules, but I would also maybe like them to adjust the new rules instead of just completely scrapping them this quick. But yeah, nothing again that I can get really upset about here. Moving on, arcane spells, nothing of interest here. I see bards, sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards, as do artificers. Yes, sure. So some clarification. And then we have an interesting one here, and that's Barkskin, because they've actually gone in and made Barkskin a different spell. As you might remember, Barkskin used to just set your AC at 16. So 1 hour concentration and its AC is 16. Now it's a bonus action to cast, and it has the same duration, but you instead get temporary hit points equal to spellcasting ability modifier plus proficiency bonus. So that's something like 5 to 10 for most levels. I like the design. I think it's much better than the old Barkskin. The old Barkskin was pretty terrible. I've very rarely seen it used. What I don't like probably is that it's very, very similar to Heroism. So you have Heroism is a first level cleric spell that gives immunity to being frightened, and then temporary hit points equal to your spellcasting ability modifier each turn. It's 1 minute only, but it's a first level spell that takes an action to cast. So these spells are of course different, but they're also very similar. And I think at a second level, I'm not a huge fan of it if we compare it to, let's say, Mage Armor. This is a duration 8-hour spells that gives you AC plus Dex, an action to cast. This is a spell that's constantly used, and I think Barkskin should be the druid's alternative to that. So maybe instead make it non-concentration, make it a long duration, and make it just spellcasting ability modifier plus proficiency bonus, and they can also always consider scrapping heroism instead, or reworking heroism so it's not dependent on temporary hit points, so these two spells feel different. But Barkskin is a spell that druids would actually go around casting on themselves and their allies. I think that would make a whole lot more sense for me personally. So moving on, we have Blindside. Blindside's basically just been explained, which is nice. It works in the way you would imagine, I think. You can see anything that isn't behind total cover. Even if you're blinded on darkness, you can effectively see a hidden or an invisible creature in that range. So that's how you would imagine it work, but it's nice to have them write out how Blindside actually works, because they didn't really before. So that's great. Climb speed, I don't see anything of interest here, so just some clarification stuff. And then we have creature types, same example. Nothing too interesting here either. D20 tests, well, here's an interesting thing, and that is that inspiration now happens on a roll of 1 instead of a roll of 20. And I like this change a lot more than the previous one they had, where it was on a roll of a 20. Still kind of lukewarm about inspiration giving you happening depending on rolls, but I think this will feel a lot better, and it's less exploitable because characters obviously don't want to go around rolling ones as opposed to rolling 20s. So I think there's something to be said for that. We will talk a bit more about inspiration when we get to that in the rules glossary here. Then we have the dash action. The dash action may seem to be the exact same. Taking the dash action allows you to make a bonus move during the current turn. But if we go in and see what the dash action actually were before, it said that you gain extra movement for the current turn. The increase equals your speed after any modifiers. And then, so basically before, dash doubled your speed for that turn. So if you dashed again, and then again, you doubled it, and you doubled it again, and you got those insane movement bursts where you could sort of get expeditious retreat and then dash and maybe haste as well, stuff like that, to gain insane speeds. Whereas now, dash just allows you to move again, which means you're not going to be multiplying in the same way. And I think that very much is what is a needed change, because the other one was just nonsensical. So in this way, dash actions, in my opinion, is made better and more clear what it does. Then we have difficult terrain, which is just better explained with examples. Nothing major changes here from the previous playtest document. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Divine spells, nothing of note here either. And then we have the exhausted condition, which is very interesting because that's been very much changed. First off, exhaustion was a condition, but it wasn't really. It wasn't worded. You would have something like petrified, and then we had exhaustion, which is just two different types of words. So already there you had some issues when you were writing out, because exhaustion isn't a condition, it's a state, whereas being exhausted is, of course, a condition, just as being petrified and so on. So I like that they changed it to exhausted instead of exhaustion. I like that it's clarified that it is a condition in line with other conditions. The way this exhaustion works is that when you become exhausted, you gain a level of exhaustion. If you become exhausted multiple times, you gain multiple levels of exhaustion. When you have a level of exhaustion, you subtract that level of exhaustion from every D20 test you make. So that's ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. And you can have up to 10 exhaustion levels, but if you have more than 10, you die. What I think is especially nice is that exhaustion now also affects your spell save DCs. So no more just not caring about it being exhausted if you're a spellcaster. So that's really nice to see, and I think that's a nice addition. And then you have the normal, your level of exhaustion goes down by 1 for each long rest you finish. As opposed to, of course, the old exhaustion, which we can just come up with here, which had a whole table and everything, where you got a disadvantage, speed, health. It was hard to remember. You had to sometimes look it up. So it wasn't the most clean design, the old exhaustion. but I do think that it had some merit, because one of my issues with the new Exhaustion, while being cleaner, simpler, easier to remember, easier to play with, is that first off, it's a lot less punishing. Getting a single level or 2 levels of Exhaustion is not gonna really affect your character that much. A flat -2 to everything isn't the worst thing in the world, especially not at higher levels. And it also doesn't affect your movement speed or the ability to take actions at all, which I intuitively would think that Exhaustion would do. If you're very, very exhausted, you're not going to be able to move that fast. So even though it's simpler and it's cleaner, I think it's a bit of an issue. Another issue I have with it is that this makes the playtest not backwards compatible at all. I know there's other stuff that does that, but this one does it a lot, because it also affects adventures where you very often have this monster has 4 levels of Exhaustion, so it can't do this and that, or this character can't participate in the combat because it has 5 levels of Exhaustion, stuff like that. Whereas now 5 levels of Exhaustion wouldn't have that creature not participate in combat, wouldn't affect stuff in the same way. So there's a lot of messing around with stuff that was already there. What I probably would want to see is instead that we stick to 5 levels of Exhaustion, 6 levels you die, so you can't get 10 now. And I would also like to see maybe just some of the stuff from this table over here come into play. And that could just be your movement speed is decreased by 5 feet for every level of Exhaustion. You'd get gradually slower. Or it could be that at level, when you have 3 levels of Exhaustion and 5 levels of Exhaustion, your movement speed is halved, and you can only take an action or bonus action or move action on your turn when you have 5 levels of Exhaustion. Stuff like that, just to get that Exhaustion feel in, but simple enough that you can remember it. There's a lot of tinkering with this. I like that they're changing it around. I like that they're trying to make it simpler. I like that it now affects spell save DCs. That was really necessary. But I think they're not quite there yet. But it's a good direction, I'd say. Moving on, we have expertise. Expertise just have clearer wording, so that's fine, but nothing too major here that I want to talk about. The same goes for fly speed, clearer wording. What does fly speed mean? So that's fine as well. Gaming set has uniform cost now. Again, nothing that hugely matters to me. Then we have the grapple condition, and it seems to be unchanged from the last UA, except that there is some capitalization in places that they missed before, but basically it functions the same as before, as far as I can tell. Then we have guidance. Guidance, of course, every cleric's favorite spell, where you can just spam out and give everyone a bonus to ability checks, has been completely reworked. So now we're just going to find guidance here. Guidance is no longer an action that has concentration, that allows a creature to roll a d4 on the next ability check it makes. This now it's a reaction that you make in as a reaction to someone failing an ability check, and then you give them that d4 to maybe make them succeed. Most notably, once a creature rolls the die for this spell, that creature can't benefit from the spell again until the creature finishes a long rest. So obviously, this fixes guidance spam, where clerics would just say all the time, I've just cast guidance. Remember, I'm casting guidance constantly, so the next ability check is going to have that bonus. That was annoying, so that's fine. I think it's nice that it uses a reaction. I think that's cool. That works for me. I do think that long rest is a bit punishing, because once per long rest really, really nerfs this cantrip. Obviously, it's still a cantrip. Cantrip aren't that useful, so maybe it's not the biggest issue that it's been nerfed a bit. But still, I think you could maybe do it 1 hour or a short rest or something that was a little bit less punishing, or maybe increase the size of the die if you're going to keep it to once per long rest, just to make it that bit more useful. Overall, though, I kind of like this change. I think it's okay that guidance wasn't a must-have cantrip for every single character. So yeah, I prefer this. Then we have the help action, which just has clearer wording as far as I can tell from the last playtest and from the original rules. Heroic inspiration is now what we're calling inspiration. I think that's probably just to distance it from bardic inspiration, maybe make sure people understand this is a different thingy. It now says that you get an inspiration when you roll a 1 for a d20 test, but that one must be on the d20 used for the test total, not on a d20 that was re-rolled or discarded. Important point. So having disadvantage is not going to give you more inspiration. Oh, well, yeah, it is actually. Having advantage is not going to give you more inspiration. Another thing is it'll probably make it so that halfling can never get inspiration because they're re-rolling their ones, so they'll have to be very unlucky or lucky, depending on how you see it, to get inspiration. So they probably need to fix the halfling class if they're going to go with this wording for it. Again, do I like that they're doing it this way? Sure. I think I would like it more, though, if they didn't have this last 3 lines where they said that the DM can also award heroic inspiration to a player character who's done something that is particularly heroic or in character. I still have an issue with that because, of course, the DM can. The DM can also just give the players a +1 longsword whenever the DM wants to do that. The DM can give them 10,000 gold pieces whenever they want to do that. They can give a character an additional spell slot whenever they want to do that. If they're not gonna codify this as a rule, like this is how you get inspiration, the DM gives it to you when this, that, or that other thing happens, like kind of like what it was before, where it was when you act in accordance with your background trait was sort of rolled into the wording here. Now it's just like the DM can give it to you if they want. Okay, sure, the DM can do that. They have always been able to do that. They will always be able to do whatever they want because they're the DM. I don't want this wording in here because I think we're mixing what should be not rules with stuff that is rules, which is this up here. So I still have an issue with this, trying to mix it mechanics with sort of this ruley thing. I'd much rather have this part over in the Dungeon Master's Guide, so you can tell the Dungeon Masters like tools to make your game more fun or make role-playing better. There you can say, okay, you have this heroic inspiration, which is a mechanical rule that happens when X happens, you get inspiration. You can also just give the players heroic inspiration whenever you feel like it. Don't put this in the player's handbook. Put this in the Dungeon Master's Guide as an optional rule that DMs can use to inspire players to roleplay. So that's nitpicking, maybe some people would say, but I think it's a very important distinction how this is worded and that this is not put together in a big bundle. So yeah, that's my thoughts on heroic inspiration in this new playtest. All right, then we have hidden, which is now a condition, which is awesome. This means that being hidden from sight is now something you actually are. It's been codified, it's been written out, it's been put in a single place, which is just vast improvement already there. Even before you read the rules, that's just better than what we did in 5e, where you had this blob somewhere in the player's handbook under ability checks that sort of described what hiding was, but really didn't do it that well. Anyway, the hidden condition is that you aren't affected by an effect that requires its target to be seen. If you're hidden when you roll initiative, you have advantage on the roll. Attack rolls against you have disadvantage, and attack rolls have advantage, and you end the condition when you make a sound louder than a whisper, an enemy finds you, you make an attack roll, you cast a spell with a verbal component, or you aren't heavily obscured or behind any cover. So, a few things to unpack here. First off, it very much hints that the surprise condition that wasn't really there, but was there, is no longer a thing. When you're hidden and you roll initiative, you gain advantage, which seems to indicate that it's no longer the fact that when some characters are surprised at the start of combat, some combatants are surprised at the start of combat, they're going to lose the whole first turn, which was the rule before because they had that quasi-condition surprised. It seems to be gone. Now, being hidden from your enemies gives you advantage on your initiative, and that's it. They still get to act on the first turn. This is a lot more balanced than the old rules, because if anyone who's played higher level play will know that surprising your combatants at 10th level just means that you win the combat. Maybe already at 5th level, because you're going to get a whole round on them, and that's just going to swing the combat so much in your favor. Especially if you also roll high initiative, so you basically get to act twice before they do. So this way, it's a lot less impactful to get surprised, but it's obviously still something you'd want. So I kind of like this change. I have to see it play tested to really know how I feel about it. But I kind of like it looking at like right now. So basically, I'm happy with this. I think this is decently fine. There's probably some clarification down here that could be something you'd maybe look at. But beyond that, I think this condition is pretty easy to understand and is pretty well written out and a vast improvement on what we had before. Then we have the hide action, which is also something that it's really nice to get down. I know it's an action already in the basic rules, but that action just refers you to the stealth sidebar. Anyway, with the hide action, you try to conceal yourself. To do so, you must make a DC 15 dexterity stealth check while you're heavily obscured or behind 3/4 cover or total cover, and you must be out of any visible enemy's line of sight. If you can see a creature, you can discern whether it can see you. On a successful check, you're hidden. Make note of your check's total, which becomes the DC for a creature to find you with a wisdom check perception. Most important thing here, no mention of passive perception. Seems to indicate that passive perception is gone. I did a search through the document for passive perception, no mentions of it, even though we have stuff like Skulker and maybe Observant as well, which used to reference passive perception. There's no references to passive perception in this playtest at all. Could be that they're moving away from passive perception as a whole, which I don't necessarily hate. I think passive perception had some merits, but it's also not the most intuitive mechanic, and it has led to a lot of confusion, especially for newer players. So getting rid of that is maybe not a bad choice. What is very important to see is that you now need to succeed on a flat DC 15 dexterity stealth check to be able to hide at all. So that really makes it difficult for the paladin in the plate mail, who has a -1 dexterity and disadvantage. They'll never be able to hide. Kind of makes sense, I guess, but it's also quite punishing before you, especially at lower levels, have a lot of creatures with passive perception 11, 12, 13, where you'd have a chance to actually hide from them if you're a paladin. So one thing that I'm still a bit concerned about is, what does "you must be out of any visible enemy's line of sight" really mean? Is line of sight like a cone, a 60-foot cone that goes out in this direction? Is it a line? Is it like, does it have to stare straight at you? Or is it just anything that is built in its field of vision? Or how do you define line of sight? Is really important for how this rule is going to work, and I'd like them to really make that clear. Like, it's a cone, it's a 30-degree whatever from the creature you're trying to hide from. Another thing is, you must be out of any visible enemy's line of sight. You have to be able to see them to hide, or does that mean that you don't count? If you can't see them, it doesn't matter if you're in their line of sight. It's just a weird distinction you make here, and it's not very well worded necessarily, I think. But yeah, the line of sight thing I would really want to have clarified a bit. I think they're going in and giving examples on a bunch of stuff here. I think giving an example of the hide action in play would be really, really helpful. Like understanding, how would a rogue that's just attack someone be able to move away and also hide? Is that possible on the same term if they run around the character or get behind cover? And then, like, I would love some examples on how they think the hide action should work. That would be really, really, really helpful. All right, moving on, we have Incapacitated. Not a whole lot of changes here, but the one thing that I mentioned last time, and I want to mention again, is that it says you can't take actions or reactions. Now they're capitalizing stuff, so it seems to indicate that an action is a specific action. It's not bonus actions, it's actions. And reactions, of course, reactions. So with this wording, which is the same as before, only capitalized, does that mean the bonus actions are still on the table when you're incapacitated? I would think not, but I would like them to clarify that. If they're going to capitalize words so they distinctly mean actions and not any type of action, they need to write actions, bonus actions, or reactions. It's important. It's nitpicking. You can probably easily understand what incapacitated means, but we need to be told bonus actions are also on here. Or they are. Maybe it's possible to take bonus actions when you're incapacitated. What do I know? I just wanted to make that very clear. Yeah, so influence action. There's a lot of to unpack here, but basically you can take an action to influence another creature. It uses charisma, which makes sense, and it's very important that they make this distinction. You can't use it on your friends, basically, the other characters, and it isn't mind control. You can't force a creature to do something that is counter to the creature's alignment or that is otherwise repugnant to the creature. Every DM should remember this and always keep it in mind. So then they give us 3 distinct attitudes in different. It's the default attitude, and indifferent creatures can be polite, they can be genial, surly, irritable, or anything in between, and you often need a charisma check to persuade an indifferent creature to do something for them. A friendly creature is something that is already friendly to the character, and they would basically help you if it doesn't mess up their day. If you want them to do something that is dangerous or tedious or whatever, take a risk, as they say here, you will need to make that influence charisma check. And then there is this hostile creature, which obviously is harder to get to do anything. And it says here, the adventurers need to succeed on 1 or more challenging charisma checks to convince a hostile creature to do anything on the party's behalf. However, the DM might determine that the hostile creature is so ill-disposed toward the characters that no charisma check can sway it, in which case the first check fails automatically and no further influence attempts can be made on the creature unless its attitude shifts. And then you have interaction down here, where when you take the influence action, either roleplay how your character interacts with the creature or describe your character's behavior, focusing on your character's request or demand. If the interaction is especially suited to the creature's desires and outlook, the DM might grant advantage to a subsequent check or might temporarily shift a hostile creature to indifferent or an indifferent creature to friendly. Similarly, if the interaction is particularly irksome to the creature, the DM might impose disadvantage, blah, 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 blah. And then you have the disability check, where you can use animal handling as a charisma check, notable. Deception, intimidation, or persuasion. The applicable skill depends on the interaction, with animal handling being reserved for beasts and monstrosities. And then we have a table that sort of describes what the DC would be and how you can influence creatures. Now, could these rules be tweaked a bit, made better, made to work better? I think so. But it's really nice to get this stuff codified. It's really nice to just have a frame of reference. You don't need to look up these rules every time you're going to roll the influence action. Just having read this once or twice and looking and saying, okay, a hostile creature, okay, it can be swayed not to harm the characters. It may does something, but it won't risk anything, even if they succeed. Makes sense. Good to keep in mind. They did a lot to like make sure to get players to understand how they should use the influence action, how the DM should use and not use it to allow the characters to sway other creatures. I think this is really, really nice. I like that they're doing this. Once again, can you tweak some stuff? Sure. But the point is that this is vastly better than what we had, which was basically nothing. Then we have the invisible condition. So this seems a lot like the unseen condition. The only difference, as far as I can tell, is that, let's just check it out. The hidden condition, conceal, surprise, attacks affected, ending the condition. You have the ending the condition thing in here, and the unseeable concealed thing is a bit different. So yeah, nothing major here, no changes to how invisibility works as far as I can tell. Then we have the jump action. With the jump action, you attempt to leap more than 5 feet. All right, so I just had to look up jumping so we could see it side by side. But basically, the old rules were that you can jump a number of feet equal to your strength score if you move at least 10 feet on foot immediately before the jump. And you can make a standing long jump to jump half the distance. And the distance you jump costs you movement. And at your DM's option, you must succeed on a DC 10 strength athletics check to clear a low obstacle. And when you land in difficult terrain, you must succeed on dexterity acrobatics check or land prone. And then there was some high jump stuff, but let's just have a look at the rules for the new one. When you take this action, your speed must be greater than 0. That's a nice addition, makes sense. And you must make a DC 10 strength check, acrobatics or athletics. If you don't move at least 10 feet immediately before this action, you have disadvantage on the check. Notable here, doesn't say a straight line. Didn't before, as far as I can tell, but you kind of need to make sure that it's a straight line. Otherwise, you can run around, run back 5 feet, forward 5 feet, and then jump. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's one thing. And then if you don't do that, you have disadvantage. On a failed check, you leap 5 feet horizontally or vertically. So no matter how bad you fail, you can jump 5 feet up into the air. Depending on how they measure that, is that where my hand can reach? Then that's insane. Is it how far I can pull up my feet? I'd maybe be able to clear that on a good day. I wouldn't expect a 10 strength cleric in full plate armor to be able to make that 5 feet vertical jump on a failed check. That just seems kind of insane. On a successful check, the check's total determines the distance in feet that you can clear horizontally or half the total if you're jumping vertically. Once again, not a huge fan of putting the distance to the result of a check, because you have stuff like expertise, you have stuff like bardic inspiration, you have a bunch of stuff you can add on to a roll. So you could, let's say you have expertise in athletics, you have a +4 proficiency bonus, you have +5 strength, so that's already 13. Then you add a bardic inspiration die of a d10, and you also get someone to use guidance on you, so that's a d4. And now you're rolling, let's say you just roll average on those dice, you're still adding like 8 to that check. So you have a baseline of maybe 20, and you just roll a 10. Now you can make a long jump that is 30 feet long, or you can make a vertical jump that is 15 feet. Now I don't expect full realism from Dungeons & Dragons, but I would prefer something that is more in line with what is humanly possible, unless you have something like a supernatural thing going on where this particular champion fighter or barbarian subclass gets to jump really crazy, that's fine. But for everyone else, I would kind of want it to be mired in reality just a little bit. But yeah, that's me. Moving on, we have the light weapon property, and this is where it gets really interesting because this is also the new rules for 2-weapon fighting. It tells us that when you take the attack action on your turn and attack with a light weapon in one hand, you can make one extra attack as part of the same action. Very notable. Before, when you make the attack action and attack with a light melee weapon that you're holding in one hand, you can use a bonus action to attack with a different light melee weapon that you're holding in the other hand. You don't add your ability modifier to the damage of the bonus attack unless that modifier is negative, and you can throw it instead. So before it was a bonus action, now it's one extra attack as part of the same action. Huge distinction, especially at higher levels where bonus actions become more usable, more characters have them. So this is a huge buff to 2-weapon fighting. It is a needed buff at higher levels at least. At lower levels, 2-weapon fighting was actually already better before people could grab feats. So now it's even better before level 5, before extra attack gets into the mix. That extra attack must be made with a different light weapon in the other hand, and you don't add your ability modifier to the extra attack's damage. You can make this extra attack only once on each of your turns. So there's some clarification here, and then they have this example. First off, I like that they're removing, or they're making 2-weapon fighting not a part of the, not a bonus action, but part of the attack action. Makes a whole lot of sense. With the changes they've also made to sharpshooter, great weapon master, and stuff like that, dual wielding is in a really, really great spot. I might do a video just comparing the mathematics of it, because I think it's really interesting to see where it actually lands as of right now. But this is a buff to dual wielding, and there's been similar nerfs to the feats that before made great weapon mastery and stuff like that the best option, basically. So it's very interesting that they're doing this. I like that they're moving away from using the bonus action, because it made dual wielding so bad for so many character classes, including the rogue, including the ranger. So I think this is nice. But they need to compensate so that dual wielding isn't that much more better than the other options, great weapon mastery or sword and board and stuff like that. So I'm curious, and I'm happy that they're moving on bonus actions. They're moving on dual wielding, but I want to see where it ends up before I can make complete judgment. So nothing major for the magic action, and going on to move. It seems to be a lot of clarification on how moving works, special speed, stuff like that, but nothing that is a major rewrite of anything we don't already know. Then musical instruments have also been uniformly priced. Again, is that a necessary change? I don't know. It's not an important one anyway. And then we have primal spells, unchanged, ritual casting seems about the same. And then we have a new action, the search action. When you take the search action, you make a wisdom check to discern something that isn't obvious. The search table suggests which skills are applicable when you take this action, depending on what you're trying to detect. So this is where you use wisdom-based skills such as perception, medicine, insight, and survival. I kind of like this. Is it necessarily something that I would expect players to say, I'd like to take the search action? I don't know. But it's nice to get codified how you can use these different skills to tell these different types of things. And it's another indicator for me that passive perception is not going to be, or is something that is trying to move away from in these playtests. So I think that's an important distinction. The sword is now a simple weapon. Yes. So we kind of guessed that based on the rogue no longer having sword proficiency. And sword is, of course, a staple for characters such as rogue, so making that a simple weapon makes sense. And then we have the study action. When you take the study action, you make an intelligence check to study your memory, book, creature, blah, 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 and then you can see what kind of things you can study. I like that they have done a table for this stuff. I like that they're putting in what Arcana covers and which types of creatures it covers. That's fine. I think history has giants, humanoids, you have nature, beasts, dragons, oozes, and plants, celestial fiends, and undead. Now you can always sort of get into the nitty-gritty of should monstrosity be down in nature, for example, and dragons up in Arcana. I'd probably think so. But those are nitpicks. I just like that they're codifying this stuff and making it easier for the DM to look up. Okay, yeah, you're trying to figure out what this fiend is. You'll have to make a religion check. Makes sense. There's a fun distinction here. I'm not sure they had that in the last playtest, but if you have proficiency in the skill that's also used with that check, you have advantage on the check too. So before, proficiency with a tool just allowed you to use your proficiency bonus for it, like you would with a skill. Now you can actually combine a tool and a skill proficiency. It was so confusing before if you had a thief or a rogue character who wanted to use the thief's tools to unlock a lock. Were you going to use dexterity sleight of hand, and then it didn't really matter if they had proficiency in the tools, thief tools, or would you use dexterity thief tools checks, and then it didn't really matter that they had proficiency in sleight of hand or expertise in sleight of hand? Like, it was very unclear which one you were using and why. Now it's pretty clear that you use whatever you want to. So if you have expertise in that sleight of hand skill, you use sleight of hand, but you get advantage because you also have like proficiency in Thieves' Tools, which of course means that rogues are going to unlock basically everything. But I like that it's made more clear how tool proficiencies and skill proficiencies are sort of used together. Another option would of course be to say that you can't use Thieves' Tools if you're not proficient with them, so you don't even get to try and unlock the lock. But in this way, you could say the rogue can try to unlock the lock with just a hairpin or a rusty nail, but they'll only get their sleight of hand bonus. If they use Thieves' Tools, which they are also proficient with, they get that advantage, which of course makes Thieves' Tools more valuable. So I like this change. I think it's a nice way to clarify stuff. Then we have teleportation. This is just mainly clarification, but they do some stuff here that is interesting, and they say that when you teleport, all the equipment you're wearing and carrying teleports with you, so they don't have to write that every time they say the creature teleports, which is nice. And if the destination space of your teleportation is occupied by another creature or blocked by a solid obstacle, you instead appear in the nearest unoccupied space of your choice. They don't have to write that out in every single spell or feature that uses teleportation, and I prefer that a lot. Then we have Tremor Sense. Tremor Sense is also just clarified what Tremor Sense actually is. It's when something is touching the contact with the same surface or liquid, and it can detect creatures or objects in the air, and Tremor Sense doesn't count as a form of sight, which is a fun distinction to make. So just clarification. So this is my run through of the rules glossary in the new 1D&D playtest document, Expert Classes. Overall, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. There is a lot of changes that they're making. I like that there's so much more clarification. I like that they're trying to codify a lot of stuff, and there's not anything in here that I'm hugely concerned about. I do think there's some stuff they need to tweak, need to change up a bit, need to clarify even more perhaps. But I think that this rules glossary, as opposed to the last one, is probably for me a net positive. I think they're definitely going in the right direction with a lot of this stuff. And the changes that I don't necessarily like aren't the hugest changes, so I don't mind that too much. So if you like this video and you want to see more 5e content, 1D&D content, become a subscriber by clicking the button down below. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.